The Token Human Series, a glimpse into the galaxy. It was always strange to think of myself as the human in a galaxy full of aliens. I mean, sure, there were other humans scattered throughout various systems, but we were always the anomaly. In a world dominated by towering, powerful beings, with alien species more advanced and complex than anything my Earth had ever known, it was hard not to feel like a speck in the vastness of the universe. But in my line of work, being the odd one out was a good thing. You see, as a token human, I found myself in situations where I was the only one who could deal with certain things, not just because of my size or agility. Well, that certainly helped, but because of what humans bring to the table: ingenuity, adaptability, and our relentless drive to overcome obstacles. It wasn't about being bigger or stronger, though there were times I could hold my own in a fight. It was about thinking differently, acting on instinct, and finding the strangest, most unexpected solutions to problems others would give up on. Our ship's crew was a mixed bag of different species. Some were tall enough to block out the sun. Others had tentacles that moved with an unsettling fluidity. Then there were the ones who looked like a patchwork of various creatures, with bizarre and intricate skin patterns that made them look like walking mosaics. Each member brought something unique, and somehow it worked. But as we made our way from planet to planet on our regular deliveries, I never quite forgot that we humans were seen as somewhat of a curiosity. We weren't supposed to be here, not really. I often wondered how it all came to be that I ended up on this ragtag ship, just a regular guy from Earth, trying to make a living in a universe filled with some of the most deadly, powerful species you could imagine. The day the machismo took over. Today, as the ship glided toward another industrial outpost, things felt a little different. We were making a standard delivery, fuel and parts. But something was off. You could feel it in the air, that subtle tension that begins to build when you know trouble is brewing but haven't seen it yet. The docking bay buzzed with the usual activity, cargo drones unloading supplies and crew members from various ships exchanging pleasantries. But it didn't take long to see the cause of the disturbance. A massive, heavily armored figure stepped into the room, his silhouette dwarfing everyone around him. The helmet alone could probably crush a human skull with ease. He wore a suit of armor so thick that it seemed to strain against the fabric of space itself, and his chest plate bore the insignia of the Smashers, an elite mercenary force known across the galaxy for their brutality and sheer physical dominance. Behind him, his companion, just as massive and intimidating, cast a shadow that seemed to swallow up the space around them. They were a pair of walking mountains, so imposing that I almost forgot to breathe for a moment. Their sheer presence filled the room. They weren't alone, either. Several other similarly huge figures flanked them, each one wearing a version of the same intimidating armor. The Smashers were known for their unmatched fighting ability, but also for their egos, which could match their size. "Move aside," the voice boomed, deep and amplified by the helmet. The command was simple, but it was enough to make the whole room pause. Official business goes first. I wasn't sure if I should laugh or be concerned. We were just making a fuel delivery, nothing official about it. But apparently, the Smashers had their own agenda. Official, huh? The voice came from a much smaller but equally vocal alien. He was an Armalite, with sharp features and an attitude that could cut through steel. His voice, though more normal by comparison, still held an edge that suggested he wasn't easily intimidated. "We're official too. We were here first, so get in line." The Armalite was backed up by a motley crew. Humans, big Filian, and even a couple of jacked-up creatures with muscles that bulged out in all directions. They formed a solid wall of posturing, pushing their way into the front of the line, their collective energy crackling with rivalry and dominance. The Smashers, though, weren't impressed. Their presence was too commanding for such petty disputes. They didn't draw their weapons. No, their reputation alone was enough to quell most challenges. But that didn't stop the tension from building, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me. The air was thick with jeers, growls, and flexing muscles, and despite my own experience in dealing with tough situations, I felt like I was standing in the middle of a storm I couldn't control. The back and forth continued as I looked over at our crew. Blip and Blop, our two biggest crew members, were already shifting uncomfortably. They weren't exactly the type to back down, but even they knew their place in the macho hierarchy. I watched as Blip, the more composed of the two, glanced from one face to another, trying to gauge the situation, while Blop stood rigid and stiff, doing his best to not make eye contact. Their many frills slicked back, signaling their discomfort in a world that valued power over diplomacy. It wasn't my problem. At least, not directly. But I couldn't let this stand in the way of our mission. We had a delivery to make, and no amount of posturing from any of these mercenaries was going to stop us. I took a deep breath and decided to act. "Guys," I called out, my voice cutting through the tension. "Let's yell delivery on 3. Blip gave me a confused glance, but after a moment of hesitation, he nodded, standing a little taller and relaxing his frills into a more natural position. Blop, on the other hand, took in a deep breath, sounding like he was about to blow out the air from an industrial engine, and braced himself. 1, 2, 3, I counted under my breath. "DELIVARI," we shouted in unison, and just like that, the room went quiet. All eyes turned to us, the sudden shift in the air palpable as the Smashers and the rival crew exchanged glances. The moment stretched for what felt like an eternity before the tension finally broke. To my surprise, the towering Smashers stepped aside, their bulky frames parting to let us through. They didn't speak. No need. Their simple acknowledgement of our need to get through was enough. I motioned for Blip and Blop to push the fuel sled forward. Even though the sled didn't really need the extra help, their support gave me a little more confidence to lead the way through the sea of intimidating bodies. With each step, I moved past towering figures who seemed to breathe testosterone, or whatever their equivalent was. But despite the unease I felt, I pressed on, heading straight for the heat seeker, who was waiting by the fuel dispenser. "Thank you," the heat seeker said with obvious relief. "That nozzle broke right after our regular supply ship left. Do you have time to stop by our sister colony on the 4th planet? They've ordered extra parts, and it sounds like they need them." I smiled, nodding. "I think we can manage that." The mission was simple enough, but with the Smashers and the bounty hunters around, I couldn't help but feel like we were in the midst of something far larger than just a fuel delivery. This wasn't just about what we were delivering. It was about how we carried ourselves through this galaxy of dominance and egos. And as usual, humanity was the wild card. We didn't play by the rules. And sometimes, that was enough. Navigating the terrain of egos, the shuttle hummed softly beneath my feet as we made our way toward the 4th planet. It wasn't a long trip, just a few hours' travel, but in this sector of the galaxy, time could be stretched thin. I sat at the helm, monitoring the instruments, while Blip and Blop manned the cargo hold. Their quiet teamwork was a reassuring presence, even if their normally stoic demeanor had shifted into something I recognized: discomfort. The environment outside had been thick with ego and tension, but the weight in the air had faded once we were clear of the station. Even so, I couldn't shake the feeling that things weren't going to stay this easy. "Everything's set, Captain." Blip's voice came over the comm, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "We're good to go when we get to the 4th planet." "Good," I replied, nodding, though I didn't really need to look up. Blip's attention to detail and efficiency had earned him his position as first mate. Not many aliens trusted humans, but Blip had always respected our ingenuity. He appreciated efficiency, no matter the source. That was why I liked working with him. He got things done, and I didn't have to explain why sometimes you had to improvise. "What about the Smashers?" Blop chimed in next. The towering figure, who was usually so reserved, sounded concerned, and I could sense his unease in his deep voice. "They didn't cause any trouble." "Not for us," I said, easing the shuttle into a more stable trajectory as we began our approach to the fourth planet. The bright ring of the gas giant loomed large on our port side, its deep blues and purples shifting in the light from the nearest sun. It was a beautiful sight, but right now it felt like a distraction. They let us through without a fuss. We'll be fine. Just keep your eyes open when we land. As we coasted toward the landing zone on the planet, I glanced at the stars stretching out in the distance. For some reason, space always looked more oppressive the longer you spent in it. The endless vacuum, the constant low hum of the ship, the dark stretch of uncharted territory, it all felt empty, even though we were never truly alone out here. Everywhere you went, it seemed like there was a rival faction, a mercenary force, or someone waiting for the moment to claim what you had, take what you needed, or challenge your existence just for the sake of doing so. That was life out here in the outer colonies. Those who had the biggest biceps and the most firepower got to call the shots. Even bounty hunters, like the ones we'd just run into, had their own self-righteous sense of entitlement. They weren't the only ones who thought they were better than the rest of the universe, but they certainly made it known. The planet below was a bustling one, home to a large refinery and a trade port, where goods from across the sector were processed and sent to markets. It was an industrial hub, surrounded by barren landscapes where only the toughest plants managed to survive. The air smelled faintly of burnt ozone, and the atmosphere, thick with dust and industrial waste, made the view from orbit look almost picturesque in contrast. I had seen a few planets like this, but this one had a reputation for attracting all sorts of shady characters, from smugglers to corrupt officials and mercenaries on the hunt for work. As I lined up the ship for landing, my thoughts drifted back to the earlier encounter at the station. The Smashers, with their massive frames and overbearing demeanor, had made their presence known. But it wasn't just them. There was something about the way those bounty hunters reacted that felt like a sign of the times. It was like everyone was out for something more than just the next paycheck. There was a deeper hunger, a need to prove something, to push their dominance into the faces of others. Landing sequence initiated, I said, guiding the shuttle down toward the planetary surface. I could see the landing pad below, a large rectangular area surrounded by metal barriers and machinery that hummed with activity. We'll be in and out quick. Just grab the parts and head back. Don't get caught up in anything. Blip gave a short nod. Understood, Captain. Blop, though, looked uneasy as his massive eyes flickered toward the large metallic structures that dotted the landscape. A lot of muscle here, he murmured, his voice low. A lot of tension. I could see where he was coming from. The way the mercenaries and bounty hunters acted at the station hadn't been an isolated incident. There was a palpable sense of competition among the factions here, and with the bounty on the runaway criminals, anyone could jump in to claim the prize. Still, we had a job to do. Bickering over territory wasn't in the cards right now. We touched down with a soft thud, the hydraulic systems of the shuttle gently absorbing the impact. As the ramp lowered, the hot, heavy air flooded the cabin, thick with the scent of machinery and oil. The light outside was harsher than I expected. Bright yellow, casting long shadows across the cracked concrete and rusted metal. A few workers in heavy protective gear scurried about, but the area was mostly quiet, save for the distant hum of machines. A figure approached from the shadows. The heat seeker from earlier, the one with the green-scaled skin, waved us over with a quick, almost impatient motion. His small frame seemed oddly out of place amidst the towering, muscle-bound workers and mercenaries, but his presence had a certain air of authority. Despite his size, I could tell he was used to being the one in charge here. "Glad you could make it," he said, his voice crackling through the static of his communicator. "Come on, the parts are just over here. We've got a lot of work to do before the rest of the crew arrives." I stepped forward, taking the lead as I always did. Blip and Blop followed close behind, both still looking uneasy despite the assurances I'd given them. The truth was, I was a little on edge too. It wasn't just the atmosphere. It was the feeling of being surrounded by so many competing forces, and right now, there was no telling who would try to flex their muscles next. As we made our way toward the loading docks, I couldn't help but glance back over my shoulder. The crew, the mercenaries, and the bounty hunters were all still hanging around, their eyes locked onto us. It was like they were waiting for something to snap, for a spark to ignite the chaos that seemed to be just beneath the surface. "Let's just get the job done," I muttered under my breath, "and get out of here." Navigating power struggles. The metallic clang of boots echoed through the dusty corridors of the refinery as I followed the heat seeker toward the back docks. The distant hum of massive engines and the hiss of hydraulic lifts mixed with the air's palpable tension, creating a sense of anticipation in the atmosphere. We had come to deliver the necessary parts, but something about this job felt different. Maybe it was the growing sense of competition between the various factions on the planet, or maybe it was the look in Blip and Blop's eyes when they glanced back at the mercenaries. Either way, there was something I couldn't quite shake, the nagging suspicion that we were about to get pulled into something bigger than just a routine fuel delivery. "Here we are," the heat seeker said, stopping in front of a massive metal door that seemed to hum with barely contained power. He reached into his utility belt, swiped his hand across a scanner, and the door slid open with a quiet hiss. Inside was an enormous storage bay, stacked high with crates and containers, some of which looked like they'd been sitting here for years, judging by the rust and grime on them. I glanced around, taking in the sight of the cluttered space. The smell of oil and metal filled the air, a familiar scent that came with the territory of industrial hubs like this one. The sheer size of the warehouse made it hard to track the movement of people, but I had a feeling that wasn't by accident. In places like this, there were always eyes watching, and even the smallest of gestures could set off a chain of events that led to much more than a simple delivery. "So, where's the part we need to fix the nozzle?" I asked, trying to keep things moving. There were only so many ways to stretch out a simple job, and I didn't want to get caught in a verbal joust with the heat seeker over whose refinery it was. I was here to work, not to make enemies. The heat seeker gestured to a high shelf across the room. "It's up there, but He trailed off, his eyes flicking nervously toward the far side of the warehouse. "You might want to hurry. We've got some company." I raised an eyebrow, catching his tone. He had the look of someone who was all too used to dealing with dangerous people, and the fact that he wasn't making direct eye contact suggested he wasn't comfortable with the situation either. I followed his gaze, narrowing my eyes as a group of armed individuals emerged from the shadows. They were not the usual refinery workers, nor were they the mercenaries I'd seen outside. These people were different, sleeker, more professional. "Ah, hell," I muttered under my breath. This wasn't just a delivery anymore. This was starting to feel like a trap. The mercenary dilemma. The group that emerged from the shadows moved with a practiced ease, their combat boots hardly making a sound on the floor as they stepped forward. I recognized the insignia on their jackets, crimson with black outlines. They were a faction known for being ruthless, known for hunting down those who got in their way. The Crimson Fangs. Mercenaries. Bounty hunters. People who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty if the price was right. I knew we were in deep trouble the moment they stopped in front of me and crossed their arms. Their leader, a tall, angular figure with a scar that ran down his cheek, looked me up and down, his cold eyes locked onto mine, sizing me up in a way that made my stomach tighten. "You're here for the parts, ah." His voice was smooth but dangerous. "The heat seekers already gotten the best of us. What makes you think we'll let you walk away with what you want?" I looked at the heat seeker, who had visibly shrunk under the mercenary's gaze. He said nothing, his eyes focused on the floor, almost as though he were hoping the floor would open up and swallow him whole. "Look, I'm just here to make the delivery," I said, trying to stay calm. "I'm not looking for trouble." "Trouble's looking for you," the leader responded, sneering as his fingers tapped rhythmically on the side of his weapon. It wasn't a subtle gesture, it was a warning. He wasn't here for a conversation. He wasn't here to negotiate. He wanted something, and he wasn't going to let me leave without paying a price. Blip and Blop positioned themselves at my back, their posture more alert than I had ever seen it. Blip, with his keen senses, could smell the tension in the air, and Blop was already calculating the situation in his mind. The fact that the two of them were silent and rigid, ready to fight if necessary, only confirmed what I had suspected. This wasn't going to be a smooth transaction. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, trying to project confidence, even though every nerve in my body was telling me to turn and run. "We're not here to cause problems," I said again, though the words felt hollow even to me. "We've got a delivery to make, and we're going to make it." The leader of the Crimson Fangs narrowed his eyes. He wasn't impressed. In fact, he seemed to find my insistence almost laughable. "It's not your delivery I'm concerned about," he said. "It's the fact that we didn't get to it first. You've been cutting into our business, and that doesn't sit well with me." I swallowed hard. "You want fuel. You want the parts." I motioned to the crates. "It's all yours. No need for a fight." The mercenary leader looked me up and down for a moment, as though weighing my words against the risk. He seemed to consider the situation carefully. But then he did something unexpected. He stepped aside, signaling his crew to do the same. "We'll let you through this time. But don't think you bought yourself any favor here," he said, his voice low, full of warning. "Next time, don't expect us to be so accommodating." I didn't need him to say more. I knew exactly what he meant. The fact that they had backed down this time didn't mean they were finished with us. If anything, it meant they were just waiting for the right moment to strike. I could already hear the distant rumblings of their engines as they began to withdraw. But the danger hadn't passed. It had only shifted. We weren't just making deliveries anymore. We were part of a larger game, one that was being played by those who had no qualms about pushing the limits of survival. "Let's go," I said to Blip and Blop. "We've got what we came for." They didn't need to be told twice. Blip and Blop moved quickly, each of them grabbing a crate and heading toward the exit. The last thing I saw before we left the warehouse was the leader of the Crimson Fangs, watching us with cold eyes, as if waiting for a mistake, a reason to pounce. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to do but finish the job.